I believe we're recording. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Wine Around the World. We're going to take a trip with Zinfandel tonight, and I've got a bunch of questions that I'd like to ask, but we'll get there. Um, First thing I want to say is thank you to Capital Federal. You know, they pay the bills around here. They keep the lights running for retroactive, and also Sharon and David Katzman, whose generous grant is keeps us going and keeps the Zinfandel flowing. And I thought of a goofy joke, which was real popular in the fourth grade. I taught fourth grade. What did the grape say when the farmer stepped on it? Nothing. He just let out a little whine. And with that brilliant warm up, I warmed them up for you, Steve.
Thank you.
We're ready to hear all about Zinfandel. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm thrilled to, are we all good? Just want to make sure I didn't mess up anything. Are we good?
I think so.
Okay, good. All right. So Zin is one of my favorite varietals, and for a number of reasons. It's got a really long history. Some of it still kind of mysterious. It is a grape that has a number of footprints, and it has gone. I guess it has so much of a history that where it is today and how it got there, for me makes it even more enjoyable. So the easiest way to do this, I'm gonna share my screen, and we will just one second.
Turn your sound off.
It's ours.
We're not showing up on the big pictures, I guess so.
All right. Can everybody see that? All right. Does everybody see that screen, that slide? Hello?
So,
Are I want to make sure everybody can see what I'm seeing. Are you
Yes.
looking at the slide of Croatia?
I can
Yes.
see,
Okay,
I can see
okay.
it.
Okay, good. All right. So this is where the grape was born. It was born on the Dalmatian coast, and it took a long time to kind of figure out that it is what it is. I mean, of course, obviously in Croatia, it's been grown there for many moons. It's something that has some regional characteristics. I mean, it varies a little bit based on where it's grown specifically, but the grape is a grape that we had a lot of love for it early on, but we didn't know really where it came from. So again, Dalmatian coast is where its origin is believed, but there's still a lot of mystery because the grape began there, and then it moved to Puglia. Now it stayed in Croatia, but also part of the Adriatic. And basically we know that it showed up in Croatia, or at least some of the grapes showed up in Croatia because the Greeks sailed up the Adriatic and set up encampments along the coast, and this was and took grapes with them, and that gave us some of the grapes that we find in Croatia today. But we know that originally it was in Croatia, and then it showed up in the heel of the boot in Puglia. And there they don't call it, well, the grape in Croatia is a grape called Soljenik Kastelanski. And it is that's the Croatian name. In Italy, it is Primitivo, but genetically the same grape. So when we were, when we were trying to figure out where this came from, we had to work our way back. So we'll go to where it really ended up. So the grape originated in Croatia. One of its family, let's say there were twins. One of the twins, or triplets actually, one of the triplets stayed in Croatia. One of the triplets moved to the heel of the boot in Italy. And the third triplet, eventually it started, we believe that it probably started in New York State, which makes sense because that's where people were that there were a lot of trade from Europe, so that would make sense. But it then took a train, probably, or a coach across the country, and it reappeared in particularly the mountainous regions of Northern California. And it did this around the time of the gold rush. So early, I mean, mid 1840s, 1850s is when you started seeing a lot of grapes, Zinfandel, being planted. Although again, didn't really know that it was Zinfandel. We just knew we liked it. Well, as it took hold in the Pacific, in Northern California, it actually found it loved a lot of things about its new home. It loved being where the gold miners were, and the gold miners liked it because it's a fairly prolific grape, particularly when it's young. It loves kind of rugged terrain. It doesn't need to be, you don't really have to tend it the way you have to tend some other grapes. I mean, it's very happy being dry farmed. It will find its own water. And again, it loves these rugged soils, anywhere from kind of rocky stuff to what almost looks like beach sand. And it took root here, and so the gold miners loved it because it was a fairly prolific wine that made fairly boozy, or a fairly prolific vine that made fairly boozy wine, which for gold miners was a plus. And so the grape has many homes, but it's probably its most significant home today would be this area in Northern California. Now let's move from that to well, how did we find it? So when the grape growers were planting these vineyards back in the day, they really weren't doing it the way we do it today. Today we'll say, all right, we want to grow Cabernet, or we want to grow Chardonnay. So let's find a place that's suitable for that. That's really a modern approach to grape growing. The traditional approach was you kind of throw it all in a fairly tight area, and you see what works, you see what doesn't work. You might even pick it all at the same time, which is weird because grapes don't ripen on the same schedule. But the so-called field blends were kind of the way that Zinfandel made there. So Zinfandel would be planted with a whole bunch of other grapes that looked and behaved pretty similarly to the Zin. So in the mid 90s, DNA testing became more of a thing, and technology allowed for us to look into that. And this woman, she is probably one. I mean, she is definitely one of the most revered wine scholars today. Her name is Carol Meredith, and she's now retired. She's a professor emeritus, but she is a grape geneticist, and she spent her entire career studying the origins of grapes. This is actually a picture of her. I think she has since sold it, but she used to have a tiny little postage stamp vineyard, I want to say on Spring Mountain in Napa Valley. But Carol Meredith was the one who led a team to Croatia with colleagues from universities there to figure out where did Zinfandel come from. And because they couldn't find anything that was a perfect genetic match. For a long time, they thought it was this grape called Plavic Mali, and was very similar, behaved like Zinfandel, but Carroll knew that it wasn't that. And they actually figured out that probably Zinfandel was one of Plavic Mali's parents. So we still, that was they knew it wasn't Plavic Mali, but they didn't know exactly that it was Zin. Well, in 2001, Professor Meredith and her colleagues figured out. They found some cuttings. They did DNA testing and compared it, and lo and behold, they had found that Zinfandel that was grown in California was really this grape, this Croatian grape, Soljenik Kastelanski. Now, the weird thing is we still don't know who Zin's parents are. That's still sort of a mystery. But we at least know today where it came from and at least where we should look for maybe Zinfandel's parents. So let's see. I've got a couple more slides. So in California, again, Zinfandel, it really favors, in part because that's where it was initially planted, but we discovered that it was actually, they were correct. It does work very well here. So you've got San Francisco, but you move inland, and Amador County is kind of at the base of the Sierra Nevadas, as is most of this growing region. So the where Zinfandel likes to grow is in the foothills of the Sierras. The oldest vineyard, here's an example of the oldest Zinfandel vineyard in the United States. It's a famous vineyard called Grand-Père. It's still family owned, although they do sell their fruit to a number of wineries. One we carry sometimes, but these vines really, they need loving care, but they're dry farmed. So they're not irrigated. They've lived for what, 140 some years, and they're doing really, really well for these vines. As a Zinfandel vine ages, so why would these still be useful in production? Well, in a young vine, the vine, a young Zinfandel vine for up to about 20, 25 years, it just pumps out fruit. It just produces lots and lots of fruit. And the fruit's fine, but it's not of the quality that certainly the older vines provide. When a vine gets to be as old as Grand-Père, probably each vine, those gnarly vines, each one is probably producing 3-4 clusters of grapes. So the energy of that entire vine is going into these 3 or 4 clusters. The vine has a sense that it doesn't need, it's old. It doesn't need to be as prolific as it was and to propagate. So it reserves its energy, and it focuses on quality versus quantity. So Zinfandel vines, I mean, unfortunately, in the 80s, a lot of these vines were grubbed up because growers were seeing that they could get a lot more money for Chardonnay, and why not? So these centenarian vines were cleared, and I do know a couple guys who fortunately tracked down them and made them into furniture, but a lot of really heritage, what we call a heritage vineyard site, were scraped and planted with probably very average, maybe even bulk quality Chardonnay. But there's one final shot of, so old vine is something that California markets. Unfortunately, it's not a regulated term. So really anybody can call their vines, I mean, their Zinfandel old vine, but for the people who truly respect the grape, old is considered north of 50. there are plenty of, I mean, we still have a fair amount of these heritage vineyard sites that are well over 100 years. And they are in many cases in protective trusts. So regardless of what happens to the ownership, the grapes have to stay there. It's really part of California's history. I mean, these vines grew up with California. And so the fact that they still exist and thrive is really wonderful. I mean, you can see from this shot, you know, I mean, they're like tree trunks. You can see also that, you know, the spacing, probably not the, you know, the entire vineyard that was planted back in the day has survived, but they did not, you know, when we plant vineyards today, we deliberately want competition between the grapes. We don't want them to have enough space to do whatever they want to do. So you can always kind of clock an old vine vineyard because you have spacing that today would be considered ridiculous unless you just printed money and didn't really care about the yield that you were getting out of your vineyard. But what will happen typically is as these vines, I mean, you can see if you move back there are some vines that don't have these gnarly tree trunks. The good thing is these vineyards, once a vine is showing signs of you know, dying, they will remove it, but they will clone an existing one and replant it to the same clone. So even though it's not, it doesn't have 100+ years of age, it is being replaced with a cutting that has been propagated so that those genetics continue. All right, now I'm going to stop sharing. There we go. All good? All right. So let's taste. Let me see. Let's start by tasting this first wine from Croatia. So in Croatia, they refer to this grape as Tribodrag. Also Sorojenik, Kastellanski, but more often it's referred to as Tribodrag. And in fact, because of the success of Zinfandel, you're even seeing Croatian producers labeling it as Zin, because they know that image, I mean, that name has a brand, is a brand essentially. I will say one final thing. I love Zin for many reasons. Again, crazy history, kind of mysterious, but it is one of the, I would say it's one of the few very, it's really our wine. I mean, yes, it originated in Croatia, but it was popularized by California and by the United States. And so where we have, you know, taken Cabernet and Chardonnay and Pinot and Sauvignon Blanc and all of the grapes that most people know, and we've pretty much just stolen or borrowed them from Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, places like that. And their planting in the United States really doesn't go back that far. I mean, we're talking, you know, maybe early 1900s even. So Zin is really one of our doing. I mean, we did this. We took it, we brought it here, and it's thrived. And so much so that you're seeing growers around the world are taking cuttings from our vineyards in California and planting them in places like Australia and South America. They want to see whether they can do some Zin as good as we can. So it really is kind of, I mean, it's something that we can be proud of. You know, our melting pot of a country came up with this, and it's kind of cool. So that aside, let's taste. So Tribodrag. The Dalmatian coast, generally, for the most part, where Zinfandel loves to grow in California, it's fairly warm. I mean, it has very cooling, you know, in the foothills of the mountains, obviously, you get warm during the day, but then the cool air washes off the mountain and chills down the vineyard. But, you know, in Croatia, it's really more coastal. It's a much cooler climate. And that shows up in this wine. So on the nose, I mean, it smells like Zinfandel. Cherries, plums, crushed berries, kind of a briar patch aroma, blackberries, things like that. Um, a little bit of spice, but probably, I mean, the spice I'm smelling is probably is more of a stemmy thing. So I'm guessing maybe they did a whole cluster fermentation where instead of picking the grapes off the stem, they actually use the whole cluster, and that gives the wine a little more structure. The stems have tannin in it, that mouth drying astringency you get with chocolate and coffee and dry red wine. So I'm smelling a little bit of that kind of stemminess to it, but alcohol wise, 13 and a half. So on the lighter side for red wine these days. That's actually, sadly, that would be what we would refer to as a classic ABV. But wines have gotten boozier and bigger over the years for a number of reasons. That's probably its own wine around the world discussion. But so little cooler climate, little more bright red fruit to it. Juicy. Yeah, definitely a lighter body in the mouth, a little juicy. But I mean, this is something that, if you're in Croatia, a lot of your food probably you go and you go down to the marina in your town, and you buy fish from a producer, from a fisherman there. This is a wine that, I mean, you could definitely have it with heavier proteins, but if you had this with a piece of tuna, it's gonna be good. It's gonna do very well. That lighter body, that juicier profile. Um, Yeah, I yeah, this is, I mean, to me, this and I think it's more than just the 13.5% ABV, but it reminds me of the Zin that I first had in the 80s that really turned me on to Zin. It wasn't, and the one that we're going to have next, a little fuller bodied. It was the earlier Zins were kind of closer to this. Um, Questions on the Croatian Zin? If we don't have any, we can move on to.
And I just
Oh, go ahead.
a few things. I really appreciated your history there. It's fascinating, and I was interested in especially this Croatian wine. I was trying to figure out exactly what the difference was, and you put your finger on it when you said it was kind of stemmy, and
Mm-hmm.
the STEMI sensation comes
Yeah.
out. But I had a question about, do you know anything about the wine growing culture in Croatia? Do they value the old vines as much as in
Yes.
California, or exactly how do they
Yes.
treat their vineyards in that respect?
So Croatia is an interesting place wine wise. So wine growing goes back thousands of years. I mean, probably there are more grapes other than Zin that that call Croatia their birthplace. It's going to take a little time. I mean, the work of Dr. Meredith, I mean, literally they were tromping through, vineyards that were old or abandoned and taking cuttings and then running tests on them. And I mean, it really was a needle in a haystack kind of thing. But based on where Croatia is located and the fact that, again, the Greeks particularly, and the Romans and the Etruscans, I mean, they all loved wine, and bodies of water made it possible for them to travel. And so whether they came from Croatia and went to Greece, or Greece to Croatia, is probably hard to determine it entirely. But so the history of wine growing in Croatia is very old. However, it was unfortunately interrupted by some politics, and their experiments with socialism did not play out well for vineyards. For the most part, they they gave precedence to quality, I mean, quantity over quality. And so the quality of wine in Croatia during the Soviet occupation, the socialist occupation was not the best. And so after they abandoned that, the growers really had a choice. They could continue producing bulk wine, or they could do what I think they really genuinely wanted to do, which was go back to their traditional ways and their traditional grapes and quality. And so really, since the mid 90s, the quality of Croatian wine has I mean, it's a J curve. I mean, it's just gone straight up. And the growers there are very proud. I mean, they are they know that they're home to some of the the wines that the world has over the millennia fallen in love with. And even if the grapes are not there are many grapes that grow in Croatia that I'm not aware grow many other places. But aside from that, the ones that, I mean, you don't even need to know the name of these grapes. You taste the wine, you're like, that's beautiful. That is balanced. It's expressive. It has all of the qualities that we want in a great wine. And so I didn't know this grape, but I mean, literally there are about 3,000 grapes that potentially could be making delicious wine. And so yeah, it was really fortunate that when the growers had the opportunity to kind of commit to something, in large part they committed to their traditional grapes made in traditional ways. I mean, that's not entirely true. They've adopted a lot of modern techniques, which have only made their wines better. I mean, cleaner facilities, better, maybe a little more meticulous management in the vineyard, things that will take a good product and at least at the very least maintain it as good, but potentially turn it into something great. So they made that choice, and I think it's paid off wonderfully. I mean, interesting little side story. There's a winery in California called Gurgich Hills, and Gurgich Hills. I mean, it's iconic, Napa Valley winery, but Gurgich was a winery that was started not by a guy named Mike Gurgich. It was a guy named Miljenko Grgic, a Croat, and Grgic actually has a winery on the Dalmatian coast today, and the grapes that they're growing, he's not trying to bring California to them. He's celebrating, the grapes that his family grew, and his ancestors grew and loved, and things that were talked about, and so. Yeah, so it's very cool. They have, the good thing is when you have the opportunity to kind of rebuild from ground up, sometimes you can correct mistakes, and the bulk wine mistake was one that I think they unanimously agreed to correct. So yeah, very the wines in Croatia are absolutely worth people's attention. Delicious wines. Sorry, kind of rambling. Did that answer the question? All right. Well, let's go on to the second wine. So this is from Contra Costa County, which sits east of San Francisco, again, along the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas. And this is an interesting wine. In California, there's a large winery called Klein Family, Cline, and Klein, and actually also Jacuzzi, and yes, related to the people who invented the hot tub. But Klein and Jacuzzi, we're doing. I mean, I honestly can't remember when they started. I'm guessing it was the late 70s, maybe early 80s. But Klein was really about growing grapes from good sources, but seeking to make a little higher production wine. And so Charlie Klein is I think he's now he may have stepped back. I've met him a couple times. He loves to party. He's a wild guy. Charlie Klein was kind of the face of Klein Vineyards, and so you go into where groceries can sell wine, you'll probably find Klein. And again, fine wine. It's nothing to write home about, but if you have to drink it, you'll be fine with it. Well, Charlie has a brother named Matt, and Matt had a different take. Matt Klein really wanted to do kind of the opposite of what his family's winery was doing. And so Matt Klein started Three Wine Company, and Three Wine focuses primarily on old vine and heritage vineyard wines. So there are some named vineyards in California today that a lot of people source from. Again, they're protected. They will not be ever scraped. But Matt Klein has been kind of an advocate for preserving the wines of these heritage sites and the old vines. So Three Wine Company focuses on that, and I thought about doing it because it's a really cool wine, but it was a little pricey, so I didn't. There's a vineyard called Evangelo, and it sits in Contra Costa. It sits kind of sandwiched between some warehouses, an electrical substation, and an hourly motel. Has really, really, really classy neighbors, but it is, I want to say 113 years old. And Evangelo, I mean, it's an amazing vineyard. The soil really is beach sand. I actually have a container of it, and it looks like you're at the beach. And Three Wine does a bottling from Evangelo, and I mean, you're tasting a century of wine. I mean, it's an amazing thing. But I very much value Matt's approach. There are some, I think he even started or at least participates in a nonprofit that helps identify heritage vineyard sites, and then figures out a way to put them in a protective trust so that they're not scraped. But yeah, I mean, the 80s were really tragic to Zinfandel. Zinfandel had almost no commercial value at that time, and I mean, it was really a wine that probably, even fruit from centenarian vines was probably going into jug wine, blended out with other things, and sold for pennies. So everything that Matt has done, and I will say, I mean, Klein family wines still are doing good work. They're just less concerned as a business model about reflecting a character in a wine, and so Matt really, I mean, I think he's done a great job. So this is Three Wine Company's old vine, and again, they will. It's an unregulated term, but it usually means at least 50 years old, because at that time, the vine starts to slow down production, focus more on quality over quantity per vine, and simply makes more complex juice that you can then work with. So this is cool. I mean, you can see, if you have two of them, you can see the similarities. The Croatian Zin is definitely lighter. The Three Wine clocks in at 15.4%, which is definitely high or higher. Zinfandel, unfortunately, is prone to higher octane. It again, very prolific, and it produces a lot of sugar. And particularly in places where it's irrigated, this vine does its best work when it has to really struggle. And where it does, it makes really delicious juice. But yeah, so this is about 50-year-old vine. It's not entirely Zinfandel. Matt, and he's on. I mean, by law, a wine only has to be 75% of one grape to kind of just forget the others. And so a lot of, I mean, red blends are very popular today. I kind of, mess with people when they say I'm looking for a red blend. I ask them, do you like wine? Yes. Oh, well, then you've had one. Then you drink them all the time. Most wines are blends of some sort, but provided it is 75%, we can kind of dismiss the others. So I will say this, I don't know the blend on this, but most of Matt's wines are field blends where they will include, there's a grape called Mataro or Mourvedre, Carignan, a lot of grapes that originally showed up in kind of the south of France. They do very well in blending with this. If your wine needs a little more color or a little more spice or elevated aromatics, like some floral notes to kind of bring some lightness to it. That was really the intent of the field blend. And today we have, most times the people who own property that was planted as a field blend have identified all of the vines. They don't want to harvest the entire vineyard at once and put it all into bottles. So even though it's a field blend, they know that the Mourvedre will ripen at this time, the Carignan will ripen at this time, the Zin ripens at this time, maybe some Petite Syrah or Durif will ripen, and so they'll use them as components and not just kind of toss them all into the hopper as historically was done. But so this wine, I mean, because of where it's from, has a little more depth. You can tell that probably this area was a little warmer than this wine from the Dalmatian coast. So you get a little more ripeness. In body, I mean, I like the balance. It's not, there are unfortunately a lot of Zins that kind of borderline on what we would call sloppy. They're just they're sweet, they're boozy, they're extracted. They really kind of sit on your tongue. I like this. I mean, there's definitely some acidity. I mean, it's definitely got alcohol, 15.5, 15.3. So it's got that. I mean, you can even see the tears. I don't know if I can. There we go. So yeah, tears reflect the legs or tears that fall down on the glass reflect the amount of alcohol in the wine. So you can see just by swirling your glass that's got some alcohol, but it doesn't show as kind of that sloppy profile. Rich but not overdone. But yeah, little more barrel. They California did where I would imagine, I'm kind of speaking off the cuff, a lot of the old world would utilize things like concrete tanks. They would use barrels periodically, but concrete tanks or stone tanks, they didn't have to replace as often. So I would imagine that the Croatian wine actually did see some barrel, although I don't get it. That's not true. I do get a little bit, sort of a kind of a vanilla tone on the Croatian wine. So yeah, probably did see barrel. But this is this definitely, I mean, this definitely has a lot more barrel added to it. I mean, you can tell that this is there's some nice barrel toast on this wine. But no, I mean I Zin is one that, and I'm a big fan of the heritage vineyards. Oftentimes, not only do these wines drink very well, they age very well. The chemistry is just dialed in on them such that, you know, a bottle. There's one of my favorite producers. They're actually located in Sonoma, but source fruit from a number of heritage vineyards, called Ridge. You know, a bottle of Ridge Zinfandel has usually a minimum lifespan of 10 or 12 years before it really even hits its stride. I mean, it's just amazing stuff. So, you know, thank you, Croatia, for all you did. You really, you got the ball rolling, and you know, we kind of took off with it, but they are yeah, you can, I hope you can kind of see that lineage, and but it's a wine. When I was first selling wine in the 90s, Cabernet was kind of on its own J curve, and pricing on cabs was going up and up and up. And I would notice this on restaurant wine lists particularly. And one of the things that I started doing was going to the Zin list, because at the time Zin was popular, but it wasn't huge. So, you know, where you would have, you know, let's say you ordered a steak, you could get you know, a bottle of Zinfandel for maybe $40, and that cab for maybe 60 or 80. And so it was a good money play, because you could get kind of that same richness without added cost. Zin loves, I will say, my most favorite thing with Zinfandel. I mean, steak is delicious, but Zin absolutely adores Kansas City style barbecue. And if you think about it, it really is obvious. You know, Zin, it's ripe fruit, with some tartness, maybe some wood smoke, maybe some pepper spice. And then you kind of think about that. Well, that's Kansas City style barbecue. Like, that's our sauce, you know, sweet, tart, spicy, rich, mouth coating. That's in. So yeah, I would encourage anybody who eats meat to, you know, get yourself some burn ends and a bottle of Zinfandel, and just absolutely murder it. It's delicious. It's funny, we have a, when we have work with, when winemakers or representatives from wineries are in the market, notoriously, they will all ask to go, usually to Oklahoma Joe's or Kansas City Joe's. I still have trouble with that, but they will want to go to Joe's and probably sit in the parking lot while they eat, you know, some ribs or some burn ends, and have a little splash of something, probably Zinfandel or Petite Sirah like, to wash it down. But yeah, Zin and barbecue is truly a match made in heaven. Any questions or any thoughts or anything anybody would like to chat about?
And there's a question in the chat that asks, does higher alcohol mean it will age better?
No, not necessarily. I mean, the most ageable wines historically, um, were wines that, I mean, for example, Bordeaux. Um, the wines of prior to, say, the mid 90s, Bordeaux was 12.5 to 13.5% alcohol. That was really the sweet spot. And those wines, I mean, the wines of the 40s, you know, you can find World War II era Bordeaux, granted, crazy expensive, but is still drinkable. It's not undrinkable. And I would, I've seen, when in the mid 90s, when really kind of the you know, there's a wine critic named Robert Parker, and he was very much a fan of richer wines, extracted wines, a little higher ABV. And so we saw winemakers sort of chasing his palate. And I did see a lot of wines that were really flashy when they were young, and then really just drove off a cliff. I mean, where they, they were inky dark and 16% alcohol, and you'd drink it, and I mean, you'd really need to have a meal with it because it was a hearty wine. But they did not age well. So I would say for the most part, it's still the case that at least in my experience, if you're looking at something for a long-term ageability, that I would say today it's probably maybe 13 to 14.5 would be a good range. But yeah, the higher alcohol wines typically show better when they're young and don't. I don't know, and I guess I'm trying to think in my mind why that would be. I mean, in part probably it would be the fruit was riper at harvest. That would yield that more additional sugar, which would give it higher alcohol. And that ripeness, I mean, back in the day when you would, like in the 80s and even in the 90s, if you bought a bottle of Bordeaux, hopefully the person at the wine store, like say a bottle of Bordeaux from a good producer, decent vintage, hopefully the person at the store would say, hey, they just released this. What you want to do, and I know this sounds bad, is you want to just stick it in your wine cellar and forget about it for like 5, maybe even 10 years. And then you'd bring it out and it would really be showing well. We don't see that today, in part because the consumer doesn't really want to squat on their wine for 10 years before they have it for the first time. And there's some technology that, I mean, we can better assess the ripeness of a grape, in some cases even using computers and lasers to analyze the grapes as they're being fed into a machine to crush them. So the underripe fruit, the things that would have provided maybe some things that chemicals in the grapes that would need more time to settle out, we don't have those anymore. So I think I don't know going forward whether we'll see as many long-lived wines as we've been accustomed to in the last 20, 30 years. It's a that immediate gratification, you have to give up some things, and having our wines ready to go when they hit the market is really where most consumers want the wines to be. And unfortunately, that means probably we will see fewer long-lived wines, but we'll see. But no, in answer to your question, no, alcohol doesn't in the case of wine doesn't assist with ageability.
Any other questions? How is that wine?
What
Good?
are you tasting today?
Yes.
What are you tasting?
Oh, no.
Oh,
My hearing. I thought you said on my taping.
oh,
No,
no.
no, I'm tasting. I'm drinking water.
Gotcha. No, this,
It
yeah, no,
ages well.
what, right? A timeless. Um, no, what are people's thoughts? Anything?
Any questions? I want to ask us, and I'm going to show you how inexperienced I am. I did read up a little bit about Zinfandel at the beginning before we came on, um, and one thing stopped me. It said it's a black-skinned white grape.
A
So
black-skinned white grape.
a black-skinned white grape originating in Croatia, and I thought,
Huh. That
um,
I mean, so it is true that the vast majority of wine grapes do have clear centers. Um, in most cases, the juice of the inside of a grape is clear
Yeah.
or murky. I don't know how to take that because I mean it definitely would. I mean, there's some grapes, for example, Pinot Gris is really a gray grape. It's not as it, everybody sees green grapes in the grocery store. A lot of wine grapes are really not green. They're closer to like a greenish yellow, and various hues of that. But no, I would say I'll have to look into why they would say that. Because no, I mean, um, definitely a dark-skinned grape. I mean, in there are times where even the skin is, I mean, and skin is where you get, you get your color, you get your flavor, you get your
Yeah.
aromas. The inside is really just kind of a chemical stew that makes all the gears work, makes the wheels go round. But yeah, the skin on Zinfandel is pretty thick. It's fun if you're ever out in wine country. It's kind of a fun exercise. If the grapes are ripe, if it's during harvest, you peel off one and peel the skin off and bite it in your mouth, and it really is. You can see so much flavor and complexity in that skin, and then you kind of chew on the center, and it's really just a little slightly sweet juice with some acid. And but yeah, that skin. I mean, it'll stain your tongue when you bite into it. It's definitely a stainer.
I, I wondered, oops, I wondered, you showed the slide of the Uptons, the old vine
Uh-huh.
lines of the Uptons, and I was wondering if that family knows where they got their original rootstock from.
It's that to my knowledge, I mean, they know who planted it. I mean, it was a family member that planted it. However, back in the day, people just didn't care about that. It sounds funny, but I mean, imagine you have a vineyard. Let's say, to keep it simple, it's like an acre, and you make your wine, and again, you're not isolating vines or blocks of the vineyard. It's time to harvest, so you strip the vines and you crush all the fruit. Um, and then maybe your neighbor down the street does the same thing, and maybe in the fall he comes over and he's got a twig. He's like, this made some pretty tasty wine. I don't know what it is, but you should try it. And so they drop that in. I mean, that was really how grapevines got passed around. I mean, there were just cuttings that would be rooted, or I don't even know if they were grafted. I mean, they were probably own root, because grafting was something that we came up with as a curative. I mean, we unfortunately, when European vines were brought to the United States, uh, when European vines were transferred, actually, when American vines were transferred to Europe, there were little root-borne louse that were existed on our vines, that our native vines, like the Concord grape, it doesn't care. It lives with these with it's a louse called phylloxera. Grapes that are native to North America don't it doesn't bother them. For the European vines, this root-borne louse will chew at the vines and eventually chew at the roots and eventually kill it. And so grafting onto American rootstock, which is what's done today. So we'll take the vine below ground doesn't really care. I mean, that's oversimplifying. It does care. They will match a rootstock that is native to the United States, that's resistant to phylloxera, to match it to, well, let's say, we have this type of soil, we get this amount of rainfall, and so they'll kind of match. like roses. They'll match the rootstock to a climate and then graft on the top. But no, back in the day, it was just like everything, like we old California growers will joke about the Samsonite clones. The clones that were the cuttings that were taken from Europe, packed in their luggage. They were never quarantined. They were never, I mean, there's a lengthy process for getting rootstock, to be able to use rootstock in the United States, because you don't want to bring in pests that are unknown. But a lot of the old school growers, they'd go visit a vineyard somewhere in Europe, and the vineyard owner would consent to them taking a snip off their vine, and they would clone it in their own vineyard. And I mean, some of the best clones today in California, are European clones that have just been in California for 100 years. Really, really good stuff. But no, I mean, I don't know that they know how it arrived. Because again, back in the day, it wasn't something that they spent a lot of time thinking about. It was just like, well, it's a grape and it makes wine and I like it, and so we're only lucky today that we have people like Dr. Meredith and the ability to DNA test and analyze, well, let's answer the questions. Where did this really come from? So there's, yeah, I will say they're definitely, there are a dozen that I can think of heritage vineyard sites, but they're all located in Amador County, in the Sierra foothills. There are a few in Sonoma, but they really were areas that were just, we're lucky to have them, and that nobody grubbed them up. But yeah, those heritage vineyard sites, Evangelo, there's another vineyard called Deaver. God, what else? Oh, Bedrock. That's a heritage vineyard site. There's unfortunately, Gallo owns it today. I shouldn't say unfortunately. Gallo has the money to take care of it, but there's a vineyard in Sonoma called Monte Rosso, and it has some gnarly old Zinfandel vines. But I would encourage everybody, if you love Zin, track down some of the heritage vineyard sites. I mean, the depth of these wines is immense. Delicious stuff. But no, I'll look into see whether I can figure out whether they, if they can answer any more to the story about how it arrived there. But I mean, for the most part, we're kind of taking educated guesses, and probably as the rush to mine gold in California grew, and people on the East Coast heard about these things happening, they gathered their stuff and maybe a couple vines that their buddy down the street gave them, from their own garden or whatever, and headed west.
That is really amazing. I know my husband had a service business years ago, and he would come across one gentleman near Topeka and we live on the farm, so he gave him some little cuttings.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that's what farmers do.
I know, and we put them in the ground, and it was just what to do. That's how it happened.
And you weren't, I mean, today, today, if you were planting a vineyard, you might go reach out to UC Davis. They have, let's see, Foundation Plant Services, FPS. But FPS is sort of the repository for all great grapevines. Like, if you need a cutting that has guaranteed provenance, you would go to FPS, and they would sell you a cutting. But we've talked about, like, when we've talked about New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, and how it's very similar in style. That's because originally growers in New Zealand went to UC Davis, went to FPS, and UC Davis said, we think you should use this one clone of Sauvignon Blanc, and they did. And so that's why a lot of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc tastes the same. But yeah, that specificity, that concern about, well, what are the genetics of this particular vine?
Mhm.
That's not traditional farm. Farmers are like, well, I grew it and it worked, and I grew it again and it worked, and now I'm going to give it to my buddy because I have, my vine needs trimming and I can give him some cuttings.
Mhm.
And
It's fascinating. You make me
yeah.
want to grow grapes out here.
Oh, I don't know. I actually, I say that only because I know that I don't have the intestinal fortitude of a farmer, so I wouldn't. I don't mind growing grapes in my backyard, and when they die, I just go to the nursery and get a new plant.
No, maybe not, but you certainly have the knowledge that is overwhelming. And
Oh,
I'm
well,
sitting here drinking water, and I think next time I'll buy a bottle of wine. And we have hit the wall here. We're at a
absolutely.
little bit after 6, but gosh, thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
It's very, very fascinating. We learn a lot from you. Let's give him this the jazz
Yeah.
hand.
Well,
Thank
thank
thank you
you.
so much, Steve. We'll see you next month. And thank you,
Sounds good.
everybody. And as they say in Czechoslovakia, taki da. Or no, that was in Wales, taki da, which is drink
Right.
up.
Well, everybody stay warm and be well.
I'm working on that. Good
Cheers.
night, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye,
Cheers.
everyone.
You.